The slides will be made available later. There'll be a Q&A opportunity at the end with a brief Q&A after each segment, time permitting. Any questions that we don't cover today will be followed up later, and we may not have all the answers today, but we will take essential questions back to the FA. For your action today, please could you all mute your microphones and turn your cameras off. That will just help to speed up the webinar experience hopefully today. You can ask questions and add chat comments via the chat, and also please do use the hands up function. The speaker will invite you to unmute to ask your question. We do want your feedback to help shape the safe return to football. Okay, so the agenda today, firstly we'll look at an overview of the return to football guidance with customer service updates from Paul Bickerton. Secondly, we'll look at the practical application and considerations for returning to grassroots football with our guest speakers. Then we've got a coach education update from Paul Bickerton again, and then lastly we've got safeguarding responsibilities in open age teams delivered by Jake Rosewell, one of our safeguarding officers at London FA. At the very end we'll have an open Q&A for everybody, where we'd hope to pick up any outstanding questions, and then we'll follow up with any later on. So I'd like to hand over to Paul. Are you there, Paul?
I am. Hi Amanda.
Hi, thanks.
Good stuff. Okay, I take it you can hear me okay if you just confirm that, Amanda.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Paul.
Lovely. Okay, that's good. So good evening, everyone. So thanks everybody for joining us. It's really good to see so many of you on the call. And I'm just going to talk you briefly through the return to football guidance that's just come out over the last couple of weeks from the FA. Now, the last time I had the chance to speak to you was actually our EGM at the end of May. And for those that joined that meeting, you'll remember we had a session at the end where we talked about the grassroots game and when that was going to come back. And I have to be honest, at the time, the situation felt quite glum. So we really couldn't see how, with the social distancing measures, we were really going to get the game back up and running soon. I do think my colleagues at the FA have done a really good job in working with the government and convincing them of the value of football, because we've essentially been given a bit of an exemption here where we're allowed to run the game competitively as we wanted to, and that is a slight change to a number of other activities, you know, that have to follow really carefully the social distancing guidelines. So I think the government have really seen the value of the game and how important it is we get it back up and running, and that's really encouraging. So we're in the much more positive position, I think, here of looking at a relatively kind of a season that could be relatively full for us, bearing in mind we might obviously see things like some local lockdowns, but it's a much more positive situation than we felt it was a couple of months ago. It is going to be challenging. You know, we're all feeling our way here. You'll have seen, those of you that have been through the guidance, that it's extensive, that there's a lot to think about, and that is essentially the price of trying to keep people as safe as possible, which is absolutely vital here. But there's no doubt that it is going to be tricky. We certainly don't have all the answers. Anything we can't respond to tonight, we'll take that back to the FA and be able to produce that as a set of FAQs. But we're essentially all feeling our way, and I do think that we've got a really clear map forward here, which is very encouraging. Okay, so I'm going to run through just a few slides on the summary of the guidance. I'll finish with a couple of points on our customer service arrangements, and then we'll have a short session just on a few questions before moving on to the next speaker. So Amanda, if you just move on to the next slide, if that's okay. Thank you. So this is just a summary of the guidance that's available. So this is up on our website. It's on the FA website as well. It's pretty extensive. So I think there's some general guidance about the return to the game. It's about 18 pages long. And then, of course, there's a summary of that, a one-page summary, and then a set of FAQs that follow on for that. I think the summary is particularly helpful because it's a one-pager. It's the type of thing that you can email out and communicate to all your players, to everybody involved in your club. The general guidance is very important to take some time and go through that. It includes very specifically the player code of conduct. and some adapted safeguarding guidance. Now, following that, there's then some more specific guidance documents. So for risk assessments, which is going to be a really important part of our work here, first aid, which is quite technical. There's some specific guidance for facility providers. That's generally for providers that own a facility, but some of it is very relevant to clubs. And then there's also some really specific guidance for the elite side of the game, so the National League and the women's football, the pyramid tiers 3 to 6. Very recently, so over the last couple of days, we've also had some updated guidance come out for referees. So again, some quite specific and lengthy guidance for referees on the grassroots game, and then some separate guidance on the National League system, and then again a short summary for the grassroots referees. The final thing, and I'm going to explain this in a little bit more detail a bit later on, but there's a bit of work that's been done by Sport England, which is for sport in general, but it is about essentially the legal risks and the duties of care as a sports and activity provider. Very relevant to us, very relevant to our leagues, very relevant to clubs. And a lot of the questions we've had coming back have generally been around, look, what is my liability? How do I know that we are running things safely? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that guidance, and again would really urge people to take a bit of time to read through it, because it's a really helpful bit of work by Sport England and a very good guide. Okay, so Amanda, if you just move on to the next slide. So that's the summary. So that's the one pager. It pulls out the really key points from the general guidance from the FA. And I think one of our essential roles, us as a county FA, our leagues, yourselves as clubs, is essentially to disseminate the COVID-19 information as widely as possible. And this is a great kind of poster or something to be emailed or something to be placed on the website, because it's short, it's really succinct, and it's really clear to people what they need to be doing. They've also split it obviously kind of before, during and after. I'll talk about a few of the points in there in a second, but essentially one of the really important points about all of this is it does come down a lot to personal responsibility and to individuals behaving in a particular way. There is a limit essentially to how much we can police this, and that is the case across all sectors, across everything that's happening at the moment. So we do rely a lot on personal behaviour, and this is the kind of thing that is useful to send out, because it really clarifies the key things that people need to think about in a fairly succinct set of messages. Okay, Amanda, if you just snip onto the next slide. So these are just a few of the essential points I think that have come out of the guidance. So as I say, they've split it into what happens before you go to a match, what happens during a game, and what happens after. Now there's some quite fundamental things in place for just before the game actually starts. Now, the first thing is this sense of kind of self-screen checks, and in the guidance you've got real clarity about exactly what those checks need to look like and the things to look for. We're all pretty aware of the symptoms. I mean, it's the type of thing that's been in the news really significantly, so people should be well aware of that. But it's really important, as much as possible, that people do that self-screen. Now, some clubs have decided to actually run this themselves. So they actually take a bit of a register. It links to the track and trace, but they include, as part of the taking of a register, the self-screen checks, and to run that themselves for things like training and for games. So self-screen checks, very important. The other thing that you will have seen in the guidance is the appointment of a COVID-19 officer for each club. So important that we specify that's for each, my understanding is for each club, not for each team. COVID-19 officer for each club, and then, you know, an essential part of that role will be carrying out a specific risk assessment. And again, the guidance documents give a template for that risk assessment, and it's got to be a risk assessment that is specific to COVID-19. So we definitely urge you to follow that template. The final thing just before is, you know, there's a whole range of other things, of course, but following the track and trace guidelines is really important. Now, that just means knowing who is at that session or who is at that game, and being able to point essentially Public Health England to those people. So a lot of clubs already have the contact details of the individuals, so you might just need a really simple register. But if one of the players or the officials or the coaches or anybody involved does test positive, then essentially they'll be contacted by Track and Trace directly, and Track and Trace will ask them to give a list of everybody they've come into contact with over the past week. Now, if they've been to a training session or if they've been involved in a match, essentially then Public Health England will follow that up with the club and will want to gain access to those details to be able to follow up with the individuals. So that's why that Track and Trace side of things is really quite important. So that's before. During is I mean, there's lots of things to think about during, but the basic premise is that apart from what they describe as competitive match play, you're actually playing where you're in contact with each other. It is social distancing at all times. So that is in breaks in the game, even in the way you engage with the referee, and of course before and after the game at half time, etc. The referees have been asked where possible to limit close proximity. One of those things is speeding up things like set plays. And then you'll also probably have heard quite a bit about the new code of behaviour. It's something the press have been very, very keen to report, which, you know, the bit they've talked a lot about is this point around coughing and spitting and that being policed. But again, it's something that we'd urge clubs to make available and to communicate widely to the players, and that they do agree to abide by that code of behaviour. Slightly less guidance on afterwards, but the fundamental point there is about, you know, wherever possible, I think it's the avoidance of changing rooms. So people coming to the game and then leaving at the end already changed, getting showered at home, etc. Changing rooms are clearly an area that people are very worried about. There is the opportunity for quite a significant transition there. It's indoors in an enclosed space, people getting changed, etc. So unless it absolutely has to happen, I think the guidance is quite strongly advising people coming changed and then leaving. And then there's a point in there about players also washing their own kit. Again, that's fairly obvious. If you look at the guidance on the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, it talks a lot about droplet transmission. So this point around droplet transmission is obviously how this virus gets really significantly passed on. And I think that the measures here are about trying to reduce that droplet transition as much as possible. I can see a couple of questions coming up on the chat. That's great. Keep doing that. I'll come to them at the end if that's okay. So I'll just run through the next few slides. A couple of other bits to bring up on that slide, if it's okay, Amanda. Okay, so I think just all of this obviously is surrounded by quite a significant number of points based around things like personal hygiene measures. So when and how you wash your hands, all of those type of things, the flow of traffic through a particular venue, the importance of communicating effectively. So there's a lot in the guidance about exactly how to do that, and it's relatively consistent and repetitive actually when you look at it, whether it is referees, whether it's players, whether it's the facility providers. There's a lot of very similar things that need to be done. All of this obviously needs to be underpinned fundamentally by safeguarding. Now, you know, what we're trying to do here is ensure that everybody who comes and plays football is as safe as possible. Of course, there's an element of risk here, but one of the things that's been absolutely key for football, especially recently, is the safeguarding measures that we've taken, in particular in relation to under 18s and adults at risk. Now, those are every bit as important, and some of them need to be adapted in light of COVID-19. So you can see in the guidance that there is some quite specific stuff around safeguarding as well. So take a little bit of time to review that. Okay, next slide, if it's okay, Amanda. Okay, good. So I'll just talk a little bit about these legal risks and duties of care, because that's been a very hot topic, and quite a lot of queries have come through to us about, you know, are we covered by insurance? What are the liabilities if something goes wrong? You know, if you know, the worst happened and somebody contracted COVID and was seriously ill or died, what is the ramifications? Have we really done everything we possibly can? Now, Sport England and Sheridan's are a fairly well-known law firm, and they've done a piece of work to look at this in a little bit of detail. And I think that what it really comes down to, I guess the legal term is this difference between taking reasonable action as opposed to being reckless. And I think in any situation, if people are quite obviously not making any effort to put any kind of safety measures in place, there is slight risk of being accused of being reckless. I think that as long as you've taken reasonable action to mitigate some of the risks, then you're in a really strong position and you should feel really confident about proceeding. Now, in terms of the guidance, it says, look at these three areas. So think about the government and public health guidance. Again, that's on the government website. The DCMS website is quite specific about that. Make sure that you take that into account. Make sure you take into account the bespoke guidance from the national governing body. In this case, it's the Football Association. Do everything you can to follow that guidance. And then, of course, it's the carrying out of a COVID-19 risk assessment. That's documented. It shows that it's really bespoke to the virus, and you can really evidence that you've put some proper measures in place. If you've done those three things effectively, then you're in a very strong position. I think, you know, it's very unlikely that any kind of claim is going to come. We've spoken to our insurers about that. But if it does, they feel pretty confident that as long as you've carried out some of these steps, then you're in, you know, they'll be in a really strong position to defend that claim. Now, that's obviously our own insurance provider, SportsGuard. The majority of youth clubs purchase insurance through us there. If you've got a different insurance provider to SportsGuard, you might want to have a conversation directly with them if you're really nervous about this. But you know, essentially, as I say, most of you are with SportsGuard as our insurance provider. Do take a little bit of time. You can see the link there. Take a little bit of time to really read through this document, and actually the section on Sport England's website about coronavirus is really extensive and really interesting. So it's well worth having a good look at some of that guidance as well. Okay, that covers kind of the summary of the various guidance out there. I'll just finish with a little point on our customer service arrangements. We update people on this every time, so if you just want to run through that. So one of the things we've done on lockdown is we've been able to do and to drive quite a lot of change to our customer service. And I just want to kind of give you an indication of some of those changes. And a lot of this is based on kind of club feedback. So the first thing we've done is a really significant audit and rebuild on our website. You know, the idea really is a lot of the queries that we get into the organisation are actually quite common very regularly. So if people can solve that themselves without having to go through the hassle of emailing or phoning, that's much better for them. So we've got a new support portal that's up and running on the website at that link there. That's through our email management system. So you should be able to find the answers and guidance to a lot of your queries on there. We also are providing very up-to-date guidance on everything that's changing around coronavirus, including the latest guidance documents, and that's at that particular address there. And as I say, all of the guidance documentation that I've just alluded to is on that section of the website. And I can see Nikita's just posted that on the chat as well for people that are interested in looking at that. We have shifted from a phone operating system. So one of the complaints we were getting quite understandably was phone the organisation, takes quite a while to get through. And when I do, my query gets passed around and it disappears and I don't quite know what happens to it. And that was kind of happening to us as well. The email management system resolves a lot of that. So essentially it allows us to track and log all of the queries. You get a ticket number and essentially we're able to see exactly where that query is in the system, and we have very clear service level agreements about getting back to people within a particular time. So it's a much easier and a much more efficient way for you guys of managing some of those queries. So you can see all the details about our shared email addresses are on that section of the website, and would really encourage you as customers to go through the email management system. It's a much better way way of resolving your queries. We are trialling it at the moment through this Fresh Desk system. That's across discipline, coaching, cup competitions, refereeing. They're our highest traffic email addresses, if you like, and then we are trialling that first and then looking at expanding that out. But the early signs are that that's working very well. Okay, we do still have the phone operating system if people really need that, but it might take a little bit longer to get through. So as I say, I think the website and the email management is a much more modern and a more effective way of getting your queries resolved. We've also been doing an awful lot more proactive communications, a lot through our social media. You'll have been hopefully receiving the fortnightly newsletter that we've been circulating with lots of updates. We're going to be running more of these regular webinars that are kind of easy for people. You don't have to get on a train and get somewhere and take up a whole evening. You're at home, you get access for an hour and a half, but it's a very good way of being able to connect properly. Okay, that's a quick run through of the guidance, some of the customer service changes that hopefully is useful for you guys to hear. If it's all right, Amanda, I'll take a few of the questions on the right-hand side on the chat. I'll run through those because we've got a few that have come up here, and then I think we'll move on to the next speaker, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Stuff. So let me start. So, and I can't promise to be able to answer all of these, but I will do my very best. So Avi Goldberg. So why are referees not given more power to oversee gel appliance and use gun temperatures? Very simple. It can be done just before kickoff. Rules can be put in place to call a game off for, say, more than 2 people have temperature, etc. Referees need to keep themselves safe and often rely on this for Lincoln, so it's in their interest. I don't think you're going far enough. So Avi, look, a perfectly fair point, and I think there's been quite a bit of debate with the FA about the responsibility of referees, the role of referees. I think they've been understandably on my side kind of nervous to give referees too much responsibility here, because essentially they've got a tough job on the pitch and there are some different guidelines for them already that they need to be responding to and kind of interpreting. So I think to start to give them responsibilities almost outside of managing the discipline in the game itself would be really quite challenging for them. And that's why I think the FA, rightly in my opinion, have said actually it's some of the organisations surrounding, i.e. the clubs, the leagues, county FAs, that will take a little bit more ownership there. So that's the first one. So Anita, why should spitting be a code of behaviour? It should be a rule that is applied and rolled out by the FA. So I think that the referees, Anita, can act on that. So as much as it's in the code of behaviour, because it's quite specific to COVID, and in particular, it's something that, you know, with the current environment that we're in, I think the FA probably want us to, or certainly referees, to manage a little bit more harshly than maybe even they normally would. But I think my understanding, and there are referees here that may correct me, but my understanding is that actually, you know, somebody spitting in the wrong way on a football pitch can actually be an infringement, and the referee can already act on that. So Gavin, you've then followed up. So it's not just spitting. How many players rinse mouth with water on sidelines? So that's a really good point, actually, because there's lots of habits that people have here that actually they don't quite realise could relate to what we call droplet transmission. Now, the reality is we just can't police every individual element of this, and the government have recognised it. You know, the police have. It's very difficult. This does come down to personal responsibility. I think what the authorities are asking, what the FA are asking, is that we all try and do our bit. So it's about personal responsibility. So it's about players thinking about, hang on, if I acted in this way, that could be risky. We're all in that position, whether we're in the pub, whether we're out shopping, or whether we're playing football. And also, ideally, you know, people reminding, because I see it sometimes as well, people behaving in a way and you think that doesn't feel that safe. It's about reminders and having that discussion with them. We're not going to be able to police absolutely everything, but I think things like the code of behaviour and things like the guideline do make people rethink a little bit, hang on, is this safe or is this not? And that's very, very important. Okay, so thank you for these. Melody, so you've asked for a link to the guidance, which Nikita's just provided. And obviously, as Amanda said, we'll be circulating the slides with a number of links on there as well. Gavin, you followed up. So do we have an FA audit check on our risk assessments for consistency? So we don't, Gavin. I think that, again, has been a topic of discussion internally. The reality is we just don't have the capacity to check all of those risk assessments. I mean, you're talking about over 1,000 clubs. It would get incredibly difficult, and I think the FA understood that it just wasn't realistic to ask for that. I think that we had this discussion on the webinar a little bit earlier. I think for the National League guidance, the leagues themselves do require to see sight of that risk assessment and for it to be posted on the club's website. Now, that isn't mandatory. It's encouraged here at grassroots level, but it isn't mandatory, and that would be for an individual discussion with your league. My advice is the risk assessment document that we've provided is really quite specific. It's good and it's clear, so that will help with consistency. I definitely advise people follow that quite carefully. And then I definitely advise that you place it on the website and you circulate it around your club. We've just done that as a business with our office risk assessment, actually, and that's great for getting a couple more comments in. So that would be my suggestion there. So we've got a question here from Tom. What's the guidance for those coaches within our club whose emergency aid has now expired? And are there likely to be online top-ups available for us? So I'll cover just a coach education update a little bit later, Tom, but I think my understanding is that the FA are extending the time where things expire to allow for the lockdown and the fact that people haven't been able to take and update courses. And then I'll probably take one more, a couple more questions. So most clubs are trying to affiliate in order to play. Shouldn't this be a priority this time? Communication this week has been, I'm currently furloughed. So let's pick that up a little bit later, Nicola. Affiliation is absolutely a priority. We've actually retained a significant number of staff in the business to be able to drive affiliation. And everybody has been provided with an individual contact in terms of affiliation. So you should be able to manage that directly with the staff member. It's also a point to say that in terms of furloughed, so the staff that are furloughed, they are back for shorter periods of time. So they're back on average 2 days a week now. So we can get that moving if you're dealing with a staff member that has previously been furloughed. And then just a couple of final ones. So bibs shouldn't be used unless they can be washed between sessions. So sorry, that's Nikita, that's your point. You're absolutely right. Okay, so Becky's just, if you have a look at the follow-up in terms of splitting, so Becky's just clarified that from a governance point of view. And I'll just have a look at a couple of the final ones. So Louise, you've asked about a limit to the number of players that are at high risk, vulnerable, able to train or play matches. We have had this discussion about people who might be shielding, and I think it's worth, we've said to the leagues, you know, to show a bit of flexibility, because there have been, for example, the sport of cricket that's found it quite challenging to get certain things back up and running, because actually quite a few teams have found it harder to field the teams because of people shielding. So we've asked the leagues to show a little bit of flexibility, and in the webinars they're very willing to do that. I think the other thing about people that are at risk and vulnerable, so we just have to follow government guidelines there. And I think at the moment government guidelines are not that people who are at risk or vulnerable should be kind of shielding or have a different set of restrictions placed on them. That might come a bit further down the line, but it's not where we are now. So again, it comes down to personal responsibility. Now, what's vital is people make their own individual decisions. as a club, you've put all of the mitigation you can, and it's then for those individuals to decide whether they are in an at-risk group and whether they want to carry on or not. That would be their personal decision. Final question that I'm going to take, if that's okay, with GDPR and track and trace, presumably the emphasis on the home team to have a main contact, not the full list and contact details. That would be right, Clive. So I think, you know, as a home team, you take care of your own team and those contact details. The away team should have that, and you just need to be able to provide public health in England with a contact to say, speak to this person. That's how it works. There's quite a bit of guidance around GDPR and the track and trace system in the guidance documents, so do take a little bit of time to go through that. There's quite a few messages coming in, and I see, Becky, thanks very much. You just responded on the affiliation question, which is great. I'll stop there if that's okay, Amanda. Otherwise, we might be here for quite a while. We'll try and pick a few of those up at the end, but if not, we will either answer them in the chat this evening, and you can see that we're doing that already with Becky. Nikita's just put the risk assessment document in, or we'll get back to you afterwards and feed some of that stuff back. So I'll hand back to you, Amanda, if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Paul. Okay, yeah, I can see that most of the questions that after the ones you've answered have all been answered internally anyway, so we're up to date with the questions. We'll pick up any questions that come in after now, we'll pick them up at the end. Okay, so moving on, we'll talk about the practical applications of the guidance in getting football restarted. As you'll be well aware, clubs do have very differing circumstances and setups to each other. Today's guest speakers will discuss some of the changes that they're implementing to increase safety and reduce the risk of COVID transmission in order to get their members back playing as safely as possible. So as well as providing some good practice examples, these discussions will serve as much to highlight the challenges that are still faced by clubs for this safe return to football. So we're also hoping that this and future forums will help to increase the dialogue and best practice sharing between clubs to collectively find more and better solutions. So first up, I'm very pleased to introduce Gavin Davis from Parkwood Rangers. The club is comprised of the men's, youth, ladies and vets clubs. They're a few weeks into the process of getting everyone ready for the restart, as we all are, and he's going to discuss some of the changes that they're implementing and also identify a number of challenges yet to be resolved. Again, if you've got any questions or comments, please add them into the chat or raise a hand and we can come to them at the end of Gavin's section. Thanks, Gavin.
Hello. Hi all. Hope you'll have to change the slides for me. So if you could go to the next slide, please, and I'll go for it. So first challenge we faced, the same as everyone, I think, was the lockdown, no football. So so obviously we chose as a club, like many clubs did, to waiver the last 2 months of our subs, in which case we lost a lot of income. But thankfully our parents, we had a donation scheme, so we were £15,000 down on loss of revenue, but we claimed about 6,000 of that back. So that went quite well, thanks to our generous parents. Obviously, the biggest issue for us in lockdown was infection risks and player safety. So we stopped completely all activity because that was a massive challenge for us, and that is still a challenge for everyone. Obviously, this is what this webinar is about, infection control and player safety. Obviously, for a club like ours, it was a massive loss of income, a loss of subs, and another thing that we're experiencing is a lot of our sponsors of pulling out or having financial difficulties themselves. So we are working on plans to try and retain our sponsors. These are like the challenges, and on the next slide I'll go into what we did about it. So engaging with coaches, we've always followed what NHS England and the FA are putting out, so we get a lot of that stuff out. And the other thing is we rent our own venue, so we had additional problems with the fact that our venue is completely closed as well. So that is again an additional problem. So it's not just our own risk assessments, it's also the risk assessments of our venue, and our venue is a volunteer run organisation as well. So there's a lot of challenges for volunteer-run organisation. If you can go to the next slide, I'll tell you some of the good news. So we've gone paperless, so we've moved to electronic registrations with GDPR compliance in place, so we can affiliate all players on the whole game system and do a complete registration electronically. If any clubs are interested in how we did that, we're more than happy to share our documents. They're easily templated in Word. We've done a phased return on the risk assessment, so we've got version 1 straight after lockdown. We've got version 2 where we can then start playing small-sided games and things like that, and we're in the phase of now doing version 3, which will be the match day risk assessments. We've run subs donations where we've claimed some money back, and where we had problems with our sponsors, a recommendation to everyone is offer them a 2-year deal. So the money they paid last year, we said, right, we're going to carry that over, because actually we found that if we give our kits a 2-year lifespan, then they still fit the players, so they're not too bad. So we've given a lot of our sponsors a 2-year deal. And the other thing we've done as well, like the webinars here, we found that we've had a massive engagement with our coaches using digital formats. So we have our teams, our club's own Zoom account, and actually getting coaches to a Zoom meeting. We're having a much better turnout on our Zoom meetings than we do when we have our in-house meetings. So I'd recommend to any club, have a look at the social media platforms, look at getting an account. It's not expensive. They're all doing deals, and you get a massive buy-in from your coaches, because they can all sit at home and look at it from their phones. So that's a real positive from our end, and we've had the best attended AGM that we've ever had in the middle of a lockdown, which speaks for itself. Next thing down is the venue opens. We've got an indoor and outdoor, so it's a sports and social club. So we have an indoor area which has got all the risk assessments in place and all the distancing measures in place. The track and trace system is in full operation, and we're happy to share those type scenarios with other clubs if they find that of interest. So we have got like a bar that's in now functioning. We've got a social hall. Dramatic, it holds 180 people, but we've obviously reduced it to 30 for the purposes of social distancing. We've got a one-way system in place, so there are quite a lot of things that you can do, believe it or not, that are reasonably easy. And we are operating a track and trace and have found a GDPR way round the problem. If anyone's interested in track and trace, we'll gladly share you with ours. So I don't know if there's any questions. I know I only had 10 minutes, so I kind of rattled through that. So if anyone wants me to recover something in more detail, happy to do that. Amanda, back to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gavin. There's no questions at the moment for you. If anyone does have a question, please put it in there. We do have a question from Jeff, which is to do with whole game login. So we'll pick that up with you later, Jeff, if that's okay. If there are no further questions on Gavin's section, I'd like to move on to Anita and Coach T from Dover House. I'm very pleased to introduce them. They're from Dover House Lions Youth, Disability and Adults and Girls. They're going to talk us through the guidance that they've produced for their club members and the steps their club is taking to keep everyone safe moving into the restart. I'd just like to add that the slides that you're about to see are the actual document that have been shared with Dover House members. There's a few slides been taken out, but I've left the majority of the slides in. We've left some comments in white, which have been mostly covered by Paul, so not to go over the same content, but just so that you can see their documents. So that's why Tariq and Anita will be missing out some of the content on the slides. So again, put any questions into the chat or raise your hand, and I'll hand over to Coach T and Anita. Thanks both.
Hello. So we're glad to be here this evening to try and share with you what we've been doing as a club from lockdown really, and we've broken everything down into 2 phases. So Amanda, if you'd just like to move on to the next slide. There are a lot of slides, so we'll rattle through them quickly. I'm not sure we'll cover all the detail, but please take the slides away. We started our retraining around about the 5th of June. So we opened up opportunities for young people to come along to our facilities after presenting risk assessments to the local borough council. One of the reasons that we felt this was absolutely necessary was that the young people in our community were starting to suffer from mental health conditions, and that information was trickling down our way, and we were being made aware of that. And something else that also we wouldn't have expected along with COVID was with Black Lives Matter. So we ended up having to deal with both of those issues at the same time in a way, and the only way we could do that was by football. Over to you, T.
Yeah, so as Anita said there, the real driver was to support the children and their parents with the mental and physical aspect of their health. What we found was a lot of the children had, as the weeks went on, had what the parents were saying has kind of gone into a bit of a shell and had withdrawn a little bit from general day-to-day life and engagement. So yeah, just to add from that, was really focused on the mental health and the best way to go about it whilst staying within the government guidelines was a challenge, but I think, or I know, we've done a great job, and the feedback we've had from all parties, passers-by, those participants and parents, has been really pleasing to see. So yeah, I think that's all really needs to be said on that slide.
So how did we do it? Next slide. T, do you want to take over this bit? I think you can probably jump this slide and go on to the next one. Sorry, Amanda. Yeah, do you want to head that one, T?
Yeah, so the how, as you can see, I won't go over every bullet point, but quite simply, speaking to Anita, I spoke to and lent on some friends in the professional game and had shared my plan, what I thought what good would look like in terms of a return back to football, whilst consulting and leaning to see what they had been doing at their individual professional clubs. Speaking to Anita as our welfare officer and taking heed of all the detailed risk assessments, be it on sites, be it on coaches, because coaches have obviously their own health conditions, and making sure that all parties that were going to participate were risk-free and healthy to come and play. So what did we do? Keeping within the guidelines, I thought the best way to go about it was have very clear defined spaces. So thinking about the bubbles that my daughter had been going to school and staying in her bubbles throughout the pandemic. So taking that same mindset and adapting it to the fields, it became very clear that it was the easiest way to do so was making sure not only did the children have a meeting point, so when they arrived, there were specific cones and areas laid out for each individual child. Each child stays in their own bubbles. And really what we thought about was because we weren't allowed to actually physically play football, it was about keeping fit, improving their spirits just in general, and making sure everyone understood that we will return back to football at some point. But in the meantime, it's a bit like a pre-season. Let's get ourselves really ready to go, to able to hit the ground running, so to speak, when we were allowed to. So I'll let you read through some of the bullet points, but I didn't want to take any of your thunder.
Well, just to mention really, because I think the bullet points are going to be there for people to read at their leisure. Just to mention that actually before we actually got down into inviting people to come along to participate in the training, what we did was we went out to each team and we sent out survey monkeys to them, because what we really wanted to understand was what the demographics, what the dynamics were within the households, so that we could ensure not every child was able to come back to training, because actually with parent shielding and things like that, we just couldn't offer them a safe environment. So although we did a survey monkey to get a good understanding of what the needs were for individual teams, and then we sort of broadened that and we looked at what the needs were for the individual children. So those that couldn't come to football, we started to implement some online online training competitions and things like that, so that the children would then win a t-shirt if they were the winner of a shielded group. So they'd win a t-shirt or something if they did the most kick-ups, or just enabling them to still feel like they were part of the club. Next slide. You will see on our slide we've got lots of images, and that's because we had a competition for all of the children to be able to say thank you to the NHS, and you'll see how relevant that is at the end. This slide is simply about our club, and we were looking at what the household measures would be, how we would manage that. So we don't really need to go on to that one. I think probably
just to touch on that, and just to say that part of it was the signage as is noted there, but another layer to what we've added in was we have a draft leaflet that we've been using to share with the parents. So it's something that they take home, digest, and it's everybody's responsibility is how we've approached this. So we have a responsibility when the children are with us, but the parents also have a responsibility to make sure their children understand why we're taking these measures and why it's important that they adhere to them, not only at football, but when they go back to wherever their environments are. They continue to adhere to the social distancing measures that, as per the government guidelines.
I see we're already at 7 minutes, and we're going to run out of time because we've got so many. So I think maybe if we just go on to what the expectations are in terms of the FA and all of the guidelines that I've read and T's read. We have put in place 2 COVID officers, as you will see, one being myself and one being T. We've also drilled down even further, and we have COVID officers now per team. So and that's for the purposes of just managing safety when the teams go away. Today we had a friendly, so we had our very first friendly at our home ground. We followed all of the rules that have been set down by the FA. In fact, we went over and above. So I was there as a COVID representative. The only thing I didn't do that I will be doing moving forward is taking temperatures as the young people arrive. But in terms of the setup, what I wanted to do was to see if what we're going to do so far is going to be done well. And I have spoken to Wandsworth Borough Council about my thought process as to how I think things should be set out on the pitches, and they've agreed with that, touch wood, so far. So if you are a Wandsworth Borough Council, if you do get your pitches through Wandsworth Borough Council, I'm hoping that you'll also find it useful. But today what we did when we got there, I set up before anybody arrived with my managers. We set up the pitch. And we set up 2 player stations. So we had player stations there, which were cones that were set down. And as soon as the players arrived, they had to put their water bottles and their bags on a cone, which was representative of where they needed to stay. Those player stations were all with social distancing in mind, and the purpose of them were that's where they start, that's where they go back at half time, and at the end of the match, that's where they go. Before kickoff, we had 4 buckets. We had buckets at both sides of the pitch with antiseptic in case for the balls to be cleaned. We had buckets behind each goal, and we also had sprays for hand sanitizers for the goalkeepers because they're more at risk with people, headers and droplets. So we had those hand sanitizers in each one. Before the game kicked off, the players came up on the centre line. Obviously, we had no shaking hands. We didn't do any elbows. But what I did in full PPE was make sure that everybody's hand was sanitised. So I did that for both teams, sanitised both managers' hands, and then everybody went to their where they play on the pitch to start the game. All parents were asked. They were given notice 2 weeks ago when the friendly was organised that the expectation is that they should turn up wearing masks, or we would like them to wear masks when on site. There was slight confusion from them because they didn't quite understand why that would be necessary, but the purpose of that really is because of the droplets. They understood it quite quickly when somebody scored a goal and they did what they always do, they shout and they cheered, but all of the droplets was contained within the mask. So today, to be honest with you, the goalkeepers were superb. When the ball went out, or when the ball went out, when they brought it back in, they just dropped it in the bucket, give it a quick clean before the game continued. We had 4 quarters. We cleaned the goals at each quarter. Actually, it really worked efficiently. I think my personal opinion is we're going to have some clubs that do it really well out there, and we're going to have some clubs that actually are not going to do it so well. And it's for the ones that do it well, hopefully we will rub off. We can probably skip right to the last slide now because we are going into 11 minutes. And I just want to sort of show you one of the reasons why there is a passion. I work in education. I've seen a lot so far. I don't need to see any more. I definitely don't want it to, I don't want anybody to be at risk whilst they're at my club, not under my watch. As I said, we had a competition. All of the children had to cover the entire outside of our facility in thank you posters for the NHS. And this last document here, or this image you'll see, was from a nurse that was thanking the young people for their messages and letting them know that it makes her day a happy day when she's on her way to work and she sees all of this. And hopefully one day the world will return to normal, and that the teams will be out there playing football. That's what we all want, but we've got to make sure that it's a safe environment. We've all got a duty to do this properly, and I will be. So if you're going to be playing my club, then do expect it to be an enhanced level when you come along. Thank you.
And there was one other thing to add there, is that not a single coach was allowed to hold any sessions until they had all sat down through one of the sessions that I had put together with Anita overseeing that. So every coach at Dover House Lions had to have a classroom half an hour of running through and actually demonstrating that they listened, it was quite challenging at times, obviously adults managing adults, but ultimately everybody has come out the other side of it, and the feedback has been very, very positive from all the parents. So I would say the hard yards have been very much worthwhile.
Do you want me to answer some of these questions, Amanda?
Yeah, that's great, both. I'd just like to say thank you for that whirlwind tour of your fantastic document. We will make that available to people so they can have a good read through it at their leisure. But yeah, you covered some of the really important points there, I think. So thank you for that. Yeah, if you want to pick up, let's have a look. There's a couple of questions about affiliations which we can pick up separately. I think the first one for you two would be HMH. I think that's Highgate and Muswell Hill, I believe. Question, did you lay out player stations for the opposition too?
Absolutely.
Before you move on to that, Anita, you might want to talk about commentary box, because that may go on to talk about some of the way that we're going about our subs and so on, and rather than obviously exchanging kind of paper money and that interaction like we used to.
Yeah, I'll just answer the one about the PlayStations. To be honest with you, I think that if you're going to do this properly, the expectation that you have for your own club, you have to make sure that the expectation is there for the other club. And so, yeah, for me, I did today, and our ongoing practice will be that PlayStations will be set up for both the home team and away team. And for our visitors, because it's 6 to a family, for the spectators, we had designated zones for families going all along the other side, and the managers had their technical boxes. So everybody is zoned off. But absolutely, whatever I set down for my own team, I will mirror that for anybody else that is coming to visit us. What else should I answer? What other one do you want me to answer, or T answer, Amanda? We have joined commentary box, which is what T has mentioned, which means it's online. So and for the track, we're using that for the track and trace as well. So our intention is that when we send out all of our details for match days, we will be sharing email addresses. We've had it signed off by the parents of the players that they're happy for us to share this information. We do remain GDPR compliant, because we're sharing that information with the parents' authorization to be able to do that, their email addresses. Ideally, clubs will have at least oh, sorry, that's not for me. Is there anything else there for me, do you think, Amanda and T, that you want answered?
Doesn't look like it, and I think the only last thing I'd say is that some of the parents that have, because we asked the parents to stand outside and stay outside of the field, so they can't actually be in, so they have to return back to their cards. So it's only literally the players and or coaches that are on the field. What's been really challenging for the coaches is obviously making sure that I manage or coach an under 11 team, so maintaining their concentration levels has always been difficult. So I think what this has done is making each coach, and the coaches have fed this back, is challenging their session to make sure the session is dynamic. What is the end result? And going back to everything we learned on our level 1s and 2s and so on, you kind of forget that sometimes on the field. So I think this moment in time has given us a moment to pause and recalibrate. So I think we should all come out of this better for it.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. That's really great. Thanks. I mean, there's a lot of comments if you just have a read in a moment when we move on, but there's a lot of comments thanking you for all of your, Gavin, Anita and T, for your great input. So have a read of that when you finished. Thanks for that. I'd like to move on now. Just a very quick coach education update from Paul, please.
Thanks, Amanda. So I'll keep this. I'll keep this short. I think the way to explain this. So I mean, you'll have seen, I'm sure, just some of the challenges for the FA over the last few months. I mean, and to be honest, it's something that's been mirrored right through football. And I think Gavin articulated the financial challenges really well when he talked about his individual club. The FA haven't been immune to that, and it's been a very challenging period for them as well. And they're having to look really carefully at some of the major changes in how they deliver some of their work. Now, one of the areas that's probably going through the biggest transformation at the moment is their coach education programme. And quite understandably, and I think quite rightly, they're moving to a much more efficient kind of digital delivery approach. And that will be especially in relation to courses like safeguarding, like first aid, and also potentially the level 1. So they're in the process of quite a significant transformation here. They're also going to be centralising the delivery of coach education. As county FAs, we're going to be taking on a much more coach development role. Now, the plan is for those new courses to be ready digitally and virtually, and they'll still be very, very interactive and tutor-led, but digitally and virtually in the first half of 2021, hopefully by the very beginning of March. So at the moment, what we're doing is obviously we're able, or we're going to be able to run some of the physical courses up to that point, but we're just waiting for some guidance from the FA about actually what does the delivery of that physical programme look like before it then transfers to a digital type programme in the new year. So we just need that guidance to come through. At the moment, like anything, it's a bit like the kind of guidance that we've been through tonight. It'll be fairly extensive about some of the requirements, and then as a business we're going to have to look really carefully at how we run those programs. One of the things we are going to have to think quite carefully about is just the financial viability of running this. So I think that there's some considerations for us as a business. There isn't really any more to be communicating to you at the moment before this guidance comes out. The courses remain postponed. We will look to get the individuals who are currently on the courses and booked on a priority onto the new courses when they're up and running. So essentially it's kind of just asking people for a bit of patience at the moment. So there's not much more I can say than that. Quite a significant change for the FA, and we'll keep you all updated as much as we can as we go along here. Just seen a quick question there from Gavin, which is, can't wait for a digital FA first aid. We'd be happy to pilot or host. That's great, Gavin. So we've definitely had a conversation with the FA about potentially piloting some of this stuff, and we'll keep that in mind. And I think, as you'd said, you know, access to kind of digital learning is you know, the future, and we've seen some very good response rates to that. So this should hopefully really help with accessibility and getting more people kind of trained and up and running. So that's it from me, Amanda, if that's okay, and on to the next speaker.
Great, thanks, Paul. Yeah, we'll just hand over to Jake now for the last segment. Our guidance, safeguarding responsibilities for open age and adult teams. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Amanda. What I'm going to go through tonight is just some changes in open age football for adult teams in terms of safeguarding responsibilities, some new stuff that's coming into play that everyone needs to be aware of. Next slide, please, Amanda. So just to keep it in simple terms for everybody, open age adult football is now changing. So safeguarding has never used to be involved with adult football, but that's now the FA have made a change there that under 16 and 17-year-olds that are taking part in adult football are going to be safeguarded the same as any other child in youth football. So what that will mean will be DBSs and things like that, which I'll go through shortly. The changes we are looking to promote them as an education piece for this season. The FA will start to sanction against clubs that don't do it from the 21-22 season. So any changes that are going to happen, we can help you in assisting. We can assist you in getting them in place. So when the 21-22 season comes around, there is no suspensions and things like that that can be taking place and put onto you guys as teams. Next slide, please. So this highlights the steps that will need to be put in place for adult teams with 16 and 17-year-old players within them. It's important that, as you would a youth team, they would adopt and adhere to the affiliated football safeguarding children policy. I'm sure there's clubs here that have youth teams and adult teams, so they'll be aware of that already. It's just a case of transferring that across to the adult teams as well. So it's important that the teams that have 16 and 17-year-old players are aware of this new changes in safeguarding, and that the coaches, managers, anyone with a regulated role within those teams now has to have a FA enhanced DBS check. I'll go through some questions and answers in a minute, which details that in further information. So what we're going to look to do alongside yourselves and the leagues is support the coaches and managers in getting these DBS checks and implementing safeguarding as something that should already be there and should be already thought about. So it's important that these 16 and 17-year-olds receive the same treatment as an adult would, but they're still aware of the safeguarding children policy behind it, and they're aware that should they have any issues, who to go to and how to highlight these. So at the bottom there, it highlights that there's some know your rights within football that is specific to 16 and 17-year-olds and then can be used for children as well. When these slides get sent out, do familiarise yourself with the links that are in it. All this information is on our website as well, so do have a look. If I can't answer any of your questions today, it's all on there. I'll give the link for that is at the end as well. Next slide, please, Amanda. So some questions that come up quite frequently for us and that the FA have highlighted. A lot of teams, this is kind of aimed at higher levels, will have specific physios, doctors, first aiders. As they have a regulated role, they do require a DBS check. Obviously in adult football, that wouldn't be the case, but as there are 16, 17-year-old players playing within that or training within that environment, they will need an enhanced FA DBS check. So as it says there, even for assistant coaches and assistant managers, they all require an FA DBS check. I know to some clubs this might be a new thing and the process of getting a DBS will be new. That's something that myself and Nikita and Markel, our administrator, can guide you all through. The process for those DBSs is due to be changing as well. So some videos and some guidelines are being put together in now that will go out to all of you guys, and you can follow that. Any questions, then by all means ask us and we can help you get through that DBS process. So this is an important one to highlight. Numbers don't matter when it comes to the open age football. If there is one 16, 17-year-old playing, training, the guidelines we've been given is doing social events and things as well. The coach, manager, whoever is in that regulated role, requires an FA in-date DBS check. It's something that they've seen a massive drop-off in football for 16, 17-year-olds because of how they get treated at open age adult football. I know that's a bit old-fashioned and things have changed, but they do see a massive drop-off, and it's something that has been highlighted to the FA that they're working on, and this is part of that. So another one that comes up quite often is a lot of people want a DBS check their committee members. That is only required if they are in the regulated role, such as a welfare officer and a manager, a coach, as well as being in that committee. Someone as a secretary, for example, does not require a DBS check if they're in contact with 16, 17-year-old. Next, please, Amanda. So very straightforward, this one. It's a £10 fee. And it will be valid for 3 years. We are sort of looking at the process of the DBS, like I said, and it will be done hopefully through the whole game system, and you'll all be receiving GBG pins for that in the near future. But like I say, leave that with us, and we will get some communications out to you guys either via newsletter, social media, however that may be, about how the DBS process will change. Next, please. So this is an important one to highlight. Although there is no requirement at the moment for open age adult clubs to have a club welfare officer, it's something that we're going to be pushing alongside this. It is going to be coming in at some point as a requirement. It's important that a welfare officer is identified. So the 16, 17-year-old has someone they can feel comfortable and go and speak to. It might be that some of you out there have got youth teams or have youth teams as well as adult teams, like I said. What you could do is have the same welfare officer for the youth teams and the adult teams. If you have that, we would suggest having a separate one for each, just to ensure that they're not overloaded with any potential work that could come their way. It's going to be potentially a big change, and 16, 17-year-olds at the best of times won't speak, but it's important that making sure they know that they have these safeguarding requirements there, that they have somebody to talk to, and has the information for even us to come to myself and Nikita. They come direct to us should they feel that they need that. And I think there's one more slide, just a bit of a summary and a round off. So any questions, concerns at all, then contact myself or Nikita, either via our emails that are on there. I've seen in the chat Nikita's put our shared mailbox email in there as well. By all means, email that. That is monitored throughout the week by one of the three of us in Team Safeguarding, so you'll get a response from that as well. And as I say, do familiarise yourself with our website, which has got the safeguarding and welfare section on it. That relates to open age, child football, youth football as well. There's some good documents on there which links to the FA that they use and they've asked us to disseminate. So do familiarise yourself with that, as it will make life a lot easier when this comes in 21-22 for proper, and there'll be repercussions if it's not met. So we will try and work with all the clubs and make sure that we can help you as best we can in getting through the process and getting you on board with that, to make sure that in the future there is no suspensions and lack of football, because that's not where any of us want to be, really. Any questions? I'm happy to answer them. I know Nikita is answering some questions throughout there.
Yeah, so Kojo's question is answered. There's just another question, point from Gavin about an online solution for DBS checks. If you want to have a look at that.
Yeah, so I mean, the online DBS checks, we get all of our requirement guidance from the FA. They've had some contact with GBG about doing remote online DBS checks, and it was deemed that it wasn't feasible for the football community, as upon recommencing football, the volunteer that would do the online check would have to then produce their actual documents in person, and there was going to be too many numbers to be able to do that. We are slowly getting back to DBS verifications and things like that, so do keep an eye out. We are offering appointments. All the ones for this Friday have been booked, but we will be having some later in the month for those that do need documents verified, and anybody that needs the process explained to them for the DBS, then by all means get in contact with us and we can come back to you on that.
Yeah, I think Gavin's saying that he's got their own process for it. I don't know if you want to just bring Gavin in quickly for a second. Is it just to do with
Gavin, do you want to unmute yourself and just go through that?
I was just saying, we looked at that because we had that problem during lockdown where coaches were running out of DBS. So we found an online solution through GBD online disclosures, because you have to verify the documents. So the easy option is that if you've got like a virtual platform like this, it's quite easy to share documents. So you can share, like if you can scan your documents in or take pictures with your phone, you can share the documents. So you can actually check the actual documents online via these forums. So we found that that was our online solution, so that you get a live interaction call. You can show me the passport, open the passport and hold it up to the screen. I can view it. Then you can share the scanned copy of it, in which case you can then verify the document, and they're going through no problem.
Okay, I mean,
this is the solution.
Yeah, that's different to the guidance we've been given by the FA. We were told not to undertake those, so that's something I'll go back to our regional manager on, just to highlight that, just to clarify that, and I'll come back to you. But like you say, if it's, I'll get some clarity on it and come back to you on that, just because that differs to what we were told.
Okay, that's great.
Thanks, Gavin. There's just one more. I think Nikita might have answered Anita's question about the update system.
Yeah.
Yeah. The update DBS update service. I think that would be useful to share with the clubs. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So I think sorry, Amanda, just one last point is on the GBG pins, that's a bit of work that Markel is doing. So he's got a video that's going out shortly. So that will go out to everybody just to highlight the steps of how it will work through the whole game system integration for the DBS. So sit tight on that. It will come. It's just gone off to get the video produced. So it will be done shortly.
Okay, thanks. Anita, you've got your hand up. I'm not sure if that's been covered in your points or if you've got anything further you want to say. Do you want to unmute?
It's just to say I understand what Gavin's saying about the document check, because I deal with DBSs in my personal and professional life. But so what they're doing in the education sector is doing something very similar to what he's just said, in terms of having a look and seeing them virtually, but then making sure that they are subsequently checked and signed off as being the original documents that were seen. So sense checking them a second time to enable things to move forward quicker.
Great, thanks. Okay, so if that's the end of the questions, Paul, would you like to make a couple of comments before final few words?
Thanks, Amanda. I mean, I guess there's just a couple of points to pick up, having listened to all of that. So I think the first thing is it's really good to see the queries coming through the chat. There, quite a few of them get covered on the information that gets circulated through our newsletter. So it's a fortnightly newsletter. If you haven't got access to that newsletter, then we'll put a form on our website that people can complete that will be very easy to access, and essentially that puts you on the mailing list and you get that. So you'll get fortnightly some pretty regular updates that covers quite a few of the points that have come up this evening. So that's the first point. I think the second point that I wanted to make is great to see people sharing information like this, and I think it's one of the reasons why we want to continue these type of webinars. I think it's really accessible. Like I say, we're getting a much better response in terms of the numbers of people on here than maybe if we ran it physically, and I'm already seeing an awful lot of sharing between clubs of good practice, and that's absolutely brilliant to see. And then the final thing, I guess, I mean, it's a thank you to everybody involved this evening, and to the guys coming in and presenting. That really was a fantastic kind of set of slides to see. And in particular, it's just to say thank you to you all as clubs, because it is a challenging time for football. Some of the requirements here are quite extensive, and you can see from Anita and T and Gavin's presentations just how much they've had to do as volunteers to put a really good service in place for their teams. But we know how important it is, and we know how key it is for people as we get through a really difficult pandemic. So just, you know, to finish, from me, a huge thank you to everybody for everything you're doing, because we really do recognise that and really appreciate it. Thanks, Amanda.
Great, thanks, Paul. I can see a few comments coming in, so we'll follow up with any afterwards that need following up with. Just want to thank you all for your attention and feedback. We will circulate the slides to everybody who's attended, along with a little feedback survey. It'll be great to get your input on how we can improve these going forward. So thank you very much to everyone for attending, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thank you.